So you'll need some sort of milking stand, I think. Some people say they can tie their goat up to the fence and milk it. Well, that's fine if it's cooperative, but it's having a bad day, it's all going to go horribly pear-shaped.
Goats are smaller than cows. They're often said to have milk that is tolerable to people that can't drink cow's milk. They've got massive personalities. If you're wondering if they're the right dairy animal choice for your homestead, this episode is for you. Welcome to Australian Homesteaders Podcast. Today, we're talking about keeping dairy goats on your homestead, and we're talking with Sharon Bromley, a dairy goat owner of 20 years. We talk about how to keep goats happy and healthy on your farm, what they need to eat, their shelter and fencing requirements, and also what equipment you need for when you go to milk your goats. Sharon is an incredible source of information, and this is a fascinating conversation. So let's jump in. Hey homesteaders, welcome to another Sunday session where we have conversations with Australian homesteaders, farmsteaders, self-sufficiency enthusiasts. We talk about traditional skills and so we can share and learn. I'm Amanda from Rockpile Homestead and I'll be your host for this chat. Our guest today is Sharon Bromley, and we're talking about keeping dairy goats on the homestead. Sharon has, I'm just going to double check. No one's in the comments yet, so I just want to make sure. Oh, it says we've got 2 viewers. Hey, if you're watching, can you just drop a comment and let us know that you can see us and hear us all good? 5 Acre Farm Cat, thank you. Thank you, Gory Perez. Okay, so our guest today is Sharon. Sharon has owned goats for 20 years or so, and her homesteading journey actually started around the same time, although she's lived on farms for around 40 years, working with horses, I believe. A few years ago, Sharon started thinking about sustainability, like more about sustainability and what more she could do. She's a vegetarian and she grows all her own like herbs and vegetables. Now, Sharon, you make much of like maybe all of your food from scratch. Don't buy anything like pre-made or processed. You have dairy cows, you have poultry for eggs. When you're growing your veggies, you practice a no-dig method of growing food following along the lines of Charles Dowding. And if you guys aren't already familiar with Charles Dowding, he's an author and he also has a YouTube channel. And he has a beautiful garden and he does lots of experimentation and you can learn a lot from him. So go check that out. Sharon also has a large orchard, like an old orchard, so well established, and a food forest around the house, which is some established, some bit of a work in process, and also a Facebook page called A Blessed Life, which I'll chuck a link in down below. Okay, Sharon. Thank you and welcome.
Thank
you. Did that
you.
about cover it? How did that go?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, you don't want to dive into the detail. It's great. That was a great intro. Thanks.
Oh, good. All right. So let's start from the start then. Today we're talking about dairy goats. I want to know, 20 years ago, what originally drew you to goats?
I had a little 5 acre farm and I was really into my dressage horses. So I was riding 2 or 3 horses a day and things like that. And one of the horses I competed on was a stallion. And obviously he couldn't be kept with the mares and stuff like that, they have to be. But I always felt sorry for him because, sitting there in a paddock by himself, does he want some company? And his previous owner kept a pig with him.
Okay.
Now, I wasn't prepared to keep pigs. I wasn't that familiar with pigs, but I wondered about sheep or goats. So I actually got a couple of sheep and a couple of goats, and he used to just sort of live out with the cloven herd, and so really happy. But the 2 goats that I got were Saanen goats, so they were a dairy breed. I didn't ever milk them. I didn't breed from them, but I just found they were just a really lovely breed. you know, great companions, funny. Goats are always funny. You know, they were just easy to look after. And
you were hooked by the sounds of it.
Yeah, after many years, one of the goats passed away, but the other one stayed, and the sheep went because I found it too hard with shearing and stuff like that. They were just merinos. And so this goat stayed with the stallion. And when he passed away from old age, I still had the goat. And I just remember the day I got the new stallion arrived on the property. I bought him from Canberra, and she ran up to greet him like, "Oh, I've got another one to look after," you know. And she was 17 when she passed away. So,
wow.
You know, and she used to just, we never fenced her. This particular goat was never fenced in. She was so bonded to the horses, she never left the property. And she used to just walk through all the fencing and go and visit someone's hay pile and, you know, all that sort of thing.
That's beautiful. What a beautiful
so that was my intro to goats. That's how it kind of got started.
You mentioned that you found them really, really fun and really funny. Goats have a reputation for getting up to a bit of mischief. What are some of did you have any challenges in those early years? It sounds like you had a fairly easy run of it with that.
I had a very easy run. I don't know if it was the breed or what, or just her. You know, Xena just, she did, you know, go under the fences, but she never left the horses. So I guess in a different situation, that would have been an issue. And it was a large, when I moved then to my big farm, which was 65 acres. So it wasn't like, there was too far to wander, you know. She just used to hang around with the horses. Look, I never had any trouble. It was quite amazing. Since getting a few sort of extrovert dairy goats, I've had more challenges recently than I had in the old days, but that's okay.
Okay, so dairy goats then, when did you transition into actually using them for dairy, or how did that happen?
So that was I think it was when I decided I'd sort of retired from riding, had, you know, broken a few bones and whatever, and a few other health issues, and I decided that I wanted to focus more on the farm and the sustainability side of things. And so I started thinking about, well, what can I do here? Now, obviously not eating meat when I didn't look at that side of things, but I thought, well, I've got my chickens. I've always had my chickens, and I've got my vegetable garden. What else can I do so I don't have to buy from the supermarket? And then, of course, I looked at all the dairy I ate and thought, well, here's a huge amount of products that I buy that cost a lot of money. Cheese and milk are actually very expensive. And where are we going to go with this? And I thought about cows, and I thought about goats, and then I thought, actually, I'll start with the goats. You know, even though I drink cow's milk, it was just a case of learning how to handle a dairy animal in a dairy situation first. It would be a lot easier with a smaller animal than dealing with a 500 kilo cow sort of thing. So I started with the goats first. Okay. And so, and then I knew I wanted to get the cow as well later, you know, sort of thing. So then it slowly transitioned into cow.
Okay, that's interesting. I won't go down the cow line just yet, even though I've got a few questions for you, but we'll keep on topic. Okay, so, all right, I'll swing back through to how you transitioned to set up for your goats.
Okay.
But let's start with maybe what setup have you got now? Like, let's talk about what you need in place to properly care for them, things like fencing and shelter and that sort of thing. Okay.
All right. Well, we'll start with fencing, because you always have to start with fencing with goats, because from day one, you will need good fencing. In saying that, it sometimes depends on the breed and the goat. My first two dairy goats ended up being rescues because I went to look at so-called pedigree British Alpine goats on a farm way out the back of Irish Town, and the poor goats were petrified of the farmer and I thought, quite wild. But they were shivering as he was talking to them, and well, I'm a bit of a soft spot, so I bought them anyway, even though they probably weren't the best choice of first dairy goat. But I noticed that because they lived on a sheep farm, just a line of electric would keep them in, you know. But I would say with fencing that, look, you need the physical barrier as well as the electric. And the reason for that is if your electrics go off for any reason, they'll be out in a flash. You know, they'll be, because they're pretty smart and they figure it out pretty quickly that the electric's gone, you know. So what I found that works for me is that even though horse people would throw their arms up in horror, is I went back to ring lock just for the goat paddocks. So I've got a dedicated goat paddock anyway. So I have a brand new, you know, 7-strand ring lock. And then I have 3 electric. So I have one at goatee chest level type, you know, size, depending on the goats. If you've got dwarf Nigerians, it's got to be lower than a Saanen. And then I have an offset, you know, coming out on both sides. And that's also to try and keep the horses off the other side as well, because I don't want them getting caught in ring lock, which is what can possibly happen with them. So the top one is obviously to stop them climbing as well, you know, because goats will climb. When you're doing your fencing, do not have it anywhere near anything they can climb on, because they will climb. And I'm talking tree stumps, logs, you know, anything like that. And don't, when you're doing the square brace in the corner, for instance, don't, you know, give them opportunities where they can get a little foothold, because they can climb anything. They truly can. My other goat paddock is the diamond mesh, what do you call it? Fencing.
The cyclone fencing?
The cyclone type fencing with electric along the top. The thing with the cyclone is they can put their little feet on it, so you've got to make sure they can't go over. Or you could have an offset, you know, on the inside of it to keep them off of that. So yeah, you need to make sure you've got that basic fencing in place from go start.
Are there legal requirements around fencing for goats?
Not that I'm aware of. I certainly don't think so. I think, you know, with goat fencing, well, any livestock, you have a responsibility to keep them on your property. So however you do that, so going on to shelters, the shelters, goats hate the cold and wet. No matter what anyone tells you, they hate getting wet and they hate the cold. They are a hot weather animal, even though they do require shade. They need proper shelter, you know, shade in the summer, and in the winter they need something to stop the winds, the cold winds, and so somewhere dry out of the rain. They do not like it. I actually have rugs from my precious goat, and I use Great Dane rugs, dog rugs, you know, for Great Danes. Because she's just a tad precious. I don't know how long it's going to last. It'll probably get chewed or something, but I might have to get some chili spray on it or something. So that's just your basic shelter. And what I have done is, with the shelter in the paddock, I've put a little goat yard around it, and that's just panels like stockyards. You can buy them goat size. So, you know, probably up to, you know, chest height maybe. They're smaller than the cattle yard type ones. They've still got the same number of bars, about 6 or 7, but they're a little bit smaller, if you know what I mean, for the goats, and therefore the bars are closer together. I found that really useful, because sometimes you have to keep them in a small yard for a specific reason, like getting your fencing contractor to reinforce the boundary. But, you know, just simple things like if you've got one that's spooky, or you need to handle kids or anything like that, have a little goat yard around the shelter that you can leave the gate open, but when you need to, and feed them in there. And then, you know, if you ever have to catch them and they want to play, you can get them in there and catch them in there.
Okay, so how about care for the goats in regards to feeding and watering? What's their requirements around there? What sort of setups do you need for that?
Yeah, feeding goats is interesting, a bit like cows. They're a ruminant.
Okay.
You have to keep in mind that a goat, unlike a cow, is a browser, not a grazer. So having lush green paddocks is not necessarily the best thing for goats. It's great to have, obviously, but they won't be happy with it, and it's probably not that great for their digestive system. Goats need roughage, tree bark roughage. So I don't have any trees in their paddock. They're all around the outside where they can't touch them. So they have plenty of shade from the trees, but not in the paddock unless you want to put, you know, Fort Knox around the tree kind of thing, because they will eat them. They will ring bark them. They won't just ring bark them. They will totally eat the whole tree if you let them. But I find that I go foraging every morning after I've done the milking, and a lot of those eucalypts that shed the bark, so they make a real big mess. Well, guess what? You can pick it up and give it to your goats. But cuttings off of certain fruit trees, citrus, anything, you know, when you're pruning your trees and stuff, give them to the goats. They'll love it, and it will be good for the digestive system. Feeding, same thing. That, you know, some people feed oat and meadow hay to their goats. Mine don't particularly like it at all. They don't really go with the grain hays, but they'll eat lucerne hay because it's very stalky. And lucerne hay is very good for them because of the calcium in it. So it's really good for dairy goats. So their feed consists of lucerne chaff. Now, you can buy pre-made goat muesli. And if you have a look at the goat muesli, it will probably have some rolled lupin, some rolled barley, some lucerne chaff, and a few other bits and pieces in it, some vitamin pellets or something like that. That's good. Be very careful, though, because they will get a bit fat on it. If they're milking, it's great because, like any milking animal, they need a lot of calories, you know, because they're producing milk. So it's good, you know, you can get it into it. But I've got one goat who's a female, and I'll explain that later, who basically doesn't do anything. She's a companion goat, and she just stays fat. And, you know, they get very fat very easily if they're doing nothing. So, you know, as you know, it's not healthy for animals to be overweight. So, yeah, you have to sort of be careful there. So, yeah, I'll feed with the dairy goat because she's producing a lot of milk. I'll give her some extra rolled barley and rolled lupins. And most of the feed I try and give her while she's milking. So I make up a highly concentrated feed that she can eat while she's milking. And then when she goes back to the paddock, she can have some hay, some lucerne hay and stuff like that, which they tend to like. And I might give her a bit of extra food as well. So that's twice a day. I don't really feed my goats anything more than that. I find they do very well and stay very healthy on that kind of diet.
What sort of kind of medical care do you find that goats regularly need? Is that something people need to budget for, to do something for them regularly? You mentioned shearing sheep before. Obviously, goats don't need shearing. Trim hoofs, is there any sort of...
Yeah, so hoof trimming is good. Yeah, hoof trimming, definitely. Look, I run mine over concrete as well into the dairy, which helps. But when I got them, they'd been on sand before and soft paddocks. Their feet, being a cloven-hoofed animal, can still have the hoof growing underneath, if you know what I mean, curling and going underneath. Look, you can buy yourself some hoof clippers. They look like secateurs, but with straight blades instead of the curved one. Or you can use secateurs, to be quite honest, in a pinch. but you do need to keep them trimmed. You know, you need to keep the toe short, and you just trim off the excess around it. It's not a hard thing to learn to do. If you get someone just to show you once, it's easy to do. And you can just tie the goat up to the fence or put it in the milking bowl, in the head bowl. My little fat one, she doesn't like standing on 3 legs, probably because she's so overweight. So what I do is I wait until she lays down in the paddock, and I go and sit next to her and put my leg over her neck, and then I just trim them while she's laying down. And that seems to work okay. Scarlett's quite happy to have a hoof trim like that. You know, you work out a way of your own animals of how they like to be done. But yeah, you could tie them to a fence or put them in the head bale of the milking stand. The milking goat at the moment, I just do her on the stand. So once we've finished milking, I check it, you know, her feet every few weeks just to make sure they're trimmed. As far as health, well, goats need to be wormed, but, you know, it's a very controversial subject about worming sheep and goats. Some people worm them every 2 weeks. Some people use natural products. Some people use chemical-based products. The thing is, there aren't a lot of wormers that are specifically made for goats. In fact, there isn't any. There is one for sheep. Okay. But, of course, there are different type of species. So look, I wouldn't make any recommendations here. Just do your own research on worming, because those original Sarnans I had that lived for 17 years were never wormed, ever. If you keep rotating them on different paddocks with other species, it's a bit like my horses. I don't have to worm them. I send fecal, have fecal counts done on them, but it never tells me that I need to, worm them, so I don't. There is such thing as overworming them. Personal choice on that one, but keep that in mind. And the only other thing that I do is they get what's called a 5-in-1 vaccination. That is just a very basic vaccination that they can have once a year, which keeps away the goat diseases as such. It's called a 5-in-1. It's a very simple injection you can do yourself. Takes 2 seconds. And look, apart from that, I know some people just go and do everything for them, and medicate them up to the hill. I think you just have to find your own balance between them. But obviously you want to keep them disease-free. And look, it's all, as well, the same like other animals, it's all about observation.
Cool. All right, so before you mentioned that you give your girl some of her favorite feed up on the stand. So let's talk about your dairy goat setup. Now, guys, in the comments, I'm taking note of the questions you're asking, and we'll circle back to them a little bit later on. So, okay, so if you do have any questions, drop them in the comments so we can ask Sharon in a bit. So, okay, cool. Dairy goat setup. What's the equipment and situation you have around that?
Okay, so you can do this very basically. It can be relatively inexpensive to set yourself up to start with, and then you can go on to more expensive equipment later. A bit like everything, start at the base level. So you'll need some sort of milking stand, I think. Some people say they can tie their goat up to the fence and milk it. Well, that's fine if it's cooperative, but it's having a bad day, it's all going to go horribly pear-shaped. So a basic milking stand, mine is made of timber, wood, recycled wood, and it's just a little stand. It's about 1 foot off the ground, and that's just to help me, not to help her. That's so that I don't have to bend down, because obviously you have to bend down a lot when you're tall like me. That's hard work. So a little stand with a head bale on it, one of those ones where you just bring the arm across, and clip it at the top. Very basic arrangement, and a little feed bin on the other side, a little godly sized feed bin for them. Mine particularly like carrots. That will keep her totally preoccupied and keep her quiet, for the duration of the milking. Now, when I first got her, I hand milked. neither she nor I actually like the hand milking.
Okay.
I guess because it takes longer than a machine, and she came from a dairy, and so she wasn't very patient. And by the time she finished her carrots, that I chopped up for her, she wanted, she just fidgeted around. She didn't fight. She just fidgeted, oh, look, what's that over there? Oh, there's a bird, like type thing. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just get one of those basic milking machines, and you can buy very basic ones for about $140, $150, which is just a vacuum type system. The only precaution you have to take with the vacuum type dairy machines is that there's no pulsator on it. It is pure vacuum. And for those ladies that might have breastfed, you might know that a breast pump can, if there's too much vacuum, it kind of pinches a bit. Keep that in mind with your dairy goat. The idea is that I turn the machine on, I put them on, the cups on her. Once I've got the vacuum and the milk starts flowing, I turn the machine right down to just ticking over. Because you've already got the vacuum with the container, you don't want to have more vacuum or more pressure, because you can damage the udder. Okay. And they'll jump around if it pinches, so that's, really, or you can go and spend $1,800 and buy a dairy made goat milking machine, or get one secondhand. But they are very rare to find, the secondhand ones. I've been watching for a very long time. I'm actually going to see one next weekend, actually. And they're not cheap anyway, because they are a good machine, and because they cost so much money, people are not going to give them away. So various ranges of, but I'm using the vacuum one, and if you are monitoring it, you're standing there, you're watching it, I release it the minute the milk stops flowing. She doesn't complain about it at all. She's quite comfortable with it. I guess less parts to go wrong, and it's a good starter. So you need that. You need hot water. You need a sanitizer. You need to look. It takes me 5 minutes to milk the goat and 10 minutes to clean up afterwards. You need to get your milk into a sanitized pail or bottles, however you're going to do it, and you then need to clean the machine and the lines and use a proper, sanitizer to do all that. And you'll need some hot water there as well, or take it all up to the house and clean it if you don't have hot water in the barn.
I was going to say, is there preparation for the udder prior to milking as well?
Yes, I just use a baby wash type. Just I use like a soft microfiber cloth. Goat's udders are a lot softer than cow udders. It's quite soft skin, really is. So just a gentle wash with a cloth, just obviously because they're laying down in the dirt, that sort of thing. You just want to wash the whole udder and obviously the teats as well. And then I give it a wipe when I finish too, because sometimes there's a bit of milk on it and you don't want to attract the flies and insects to them, kind of thing. So I just give it a gentle wipe afterwards as well, just to keep it nice and clean. That's pretty much it, really. It's pretty straightforward.
Nice. Very thorough, thank you. You've mentioned a couple of different breeds of goat during our conversation. Can you tell me a little bit more about the types of breeds a homesteader might be looking at to keep as a dairy goat?
Yeah, well, you've got the full-size goats, and just recently Nigerian dwarves have, popped up everywhere. I haven't had any experience with them. People seem to like them because they're smaller and cuter. I take one look at where the udder is and decide that that's far too much bending, and there's not much clearance between the udder and the ground. So I don't know, but I just envision a bit of pain there trying to milk them. But I stand to be corrected on that. So my experiences with the full size goats, that have been around for many, many years were imported into Australia from the year dot sort of thing. Yeah. So you've got some basic breeds, the Saanens, which are the white ones with the sticky up ears. They are a very common, dairy goat breed. You've got the Anglo-Nubians, which are a British breed as well. They're the ones with the loppy ears. They're really cute.
Very pretty goats.
Brown, black, white, sort of usually multicolored, loppy ears. They were bred up from Egyptian goats and were raised bred in the UK. You then have got the Alpine type breeds like the British Alpine and the Toggenburg. So they're the black and white or brown and white ones with the stripy faces. I've got a pair of them. They, again, really good milking goats. And the two breeds that are specific to Australia that have been developed, one is called the Australian Milan, and my main milking goat is one of them. I think she's the only one in Western Australia, or the first one bred here. So you won't find them around very much yet, but they are on the East Coast. And yes, I am going to breed more of them. Now, they are basically a black Saanen. And the reason they were developed in Australia was because they have black skin. And black skin animals fare a lot better with the sun, obviously. Not that I had any problem with my Saanens, but they do have pink skin and pink noses. So you have that concern that maybe you could have some trouble. And then there's the Australian Brown, which is pretty much the same breeding as the Australian Milan, but they're a caramel colour, a brown colour. And again, they have the dark skin as well. So I have one of each of those, and they do very well, in the climate. They're the main dairy goat breeds, the large ones that are used, are used for small dairies, for homesteaders, and commercial dairies as well. But I do know of a commercial dairy that has dwarf Nigerians.
Interesting. So what do you know much about differences in temperament? Perhaps Sarah asked about, like if there any particular breed of goat that's good if you've got a young family, if you've got children, that sort of thing. Yeah,
look, really, dairy goat breeds are they've been domesticated for hundreds and hundreds of years. I think it will come down to when you buy one, make sure you buy from a reputable seller, really. I don't think there's much difference between the breeds. I have found all of those breeds that are, the Saanens are very reliable, and so are the Anglo-Nubians, for children. Both those breeds I have seen around children. Goats are just like really goaty dogs. They like to be pets, especially if they've been raised, obviously. Don't go out and buy a feral goat, or like I did, buy a goat that has been mishandled or maltreated, because they're not aggressive, but they're just standoffish. They just don't want to know. They're frightened. These two that I purchased before, that they come up to me now and they feed out of the bucket and they've got collars on and stuff, but there's still a trust level there that has been broken. So get ones that have been handled from birth, that have been raised by a reputable breeder. And there are lots of breeders around Perth region. And I would imagine on the East Coast there would be lots as well. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, well, I might just have a look at our comments here and see. And so you can take the opportunity to take a sip of tea if you like. And I'll just have a look and see what questions we have, and because I know there's a few coming through.
Okay.
All right. So, Bush Edge Homesteading said she wishes that all goat owners were that responsible with fencing.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I think people just assume they might be like sheep or something like that, but they've got
Even
a different
sheep are tough,
mindset.
so
Sheep can,
you know
yeah,
and
absolutely.
okay, so Five Acre Farm wants to know if do the goats mind having their hooves trimmed? I mean, we kind of covered that, but
Yeah. I guess it's like
okay?
anything when you start to handle them when they're young, and it's a bit like any livestock. I do the same with my calves. They've got a halter on before they're 5 days old. The same with kids. And young goatlings. You want to handle them and get them used to you, not just cute scratches, but put a little halter or collar on them, teach them to tie while they're small, pick their feet up when they're little, But in saying that, even with my scary feral goats, if you know, when they're not feral, mishandled goats, is that a goat's not a large animal. And really, if you tied it up to a fence and just picked its leg up slowly, they might struggle for a while. That's, you know what I mean? But it's a case of doing it every day until they get used to the fact that they're not going to get hurt. But they don't actually mind the trimming, because the trimming doesn't hurt them. It's just pressure, isn't it? It's a bit like trimming any animal's hooves. They just got to get used to that pressure of when you're doing the clip. I just found I'll do a little bit at a time, maybe one leg at a time, rather than doing all 4 in a day. I haven't had any trouble, to be quite honest, with trimming goats' feet.
You mentioned that them even just walking across the concrete to the milking helps manage the hooves. Would something like if you had like a rocky outcrop or something like that within the paddock they're in, that would help too? Yeah,
I think people that have rocky landscapes probably don't even have to trim their hooves. You'll find that they will naturally stay trimmed. It's just that where I am, I'm on sand on clay, so it's not particularly hard, and it gets quite wet in the winter. So they obviously, the softer the ground, the more you'll have to trim them. So keeping them on rocky outcrops is a perfect situation, and you'll probably find that you don't have to trim them at all.
And if there's like not just the outcrop, but like piles of rocks, then they're like jumping up on them.
Well, look, there's one thing about goats that I didn't mention is give them some things to play on. They truly,
okay, that's good.
They're quite intelligent animals, and they will get bored. So they'll find something to do that you're not going to be very happy with. If you some upturned boxes, as in wood boxes, crates, those great big cable drums, the big wooden cable drums. Put some stepping stones, great big logs, rocky outcrops, or just put a pile of rocks where, all the rocks off your property that you want to get out of the other paddocks, put them in a pile in the goat paddock, and they'll love you for it, because they'll see that as something to explore, and they'll jump on it and jump off of it. They'll chase each other. They have quite a lot of intelligence and therefore need to be occupied, I think.
We've got a property locally that I drive past, and in their goat paddock they've got a children's like play set,
playground,
whole playground thing, and the goats are always all over it. It's so cute.
Absolutely. I have a carpenter, and he does some work on the property occasionally, and he redoes children's playgrounds for local government. And I'm actually going to ask him if he's ever taking one down, and because it's not suitable for children or safe for children anymore. I said, let me know, because I'm sure my goats would love it.
Yes.
You could just recycle the old playground for sure.
Okay, so I think I have a couple of questions around the milking here. Does milk quality differ from like a winter paddock versus a summer paddock, depending on what you're feeding them?
Yeah, so it will possibly, I think if you keep a consistent feeding pattern during the year, you'll get that same quality. It's only if you're starving the poor things or they're not getting the calories they need where I think your milk quality would go down. But, the lucerne hay, is pretty important. The muesli is pretty important to get, good calories into them. And then it's grazing, and in the summer it's dry grazing, in the winter it's wet grazing, green grass. But they aren't grazers as such. They will graze for a while, but they're browsers. They need some logs to chew on. Dried eucalypt leaves, old branches that you trim off trees, chuck them in there, they'll be demolished.
Nice.
So, yeah, and it doesn't get a eucalyptus smell if the milk, if you feed them eucalypts and stuff like that. I've never found anything. Goatee milk is old milk or supermarket milk that's been homogenized, so they're playing around with the permeates, if you know what I mean. Fresh goat's milk shouldn't be too goatee at all. It should be quite nice.
When we were at your cheese workshop you were mentioning, I think there was a discussion around how to make sure your goat milk doesn't taste goatee, and there was like a few different ideas. So you think it's mainly around just the freshness of it and kind of not interfering with it?
Get it in the fridge as soon as possible. Now I just bought an old fridge and put it down in the stables, where the little goat dairy is, so the milk goes straight into a can and goes straight into the fridge. That's step one. Get it chilled as soon as possible. But use fresh milk for your cheese making, up to 3 or 4 days old. When it gets through at 7 days, it probably does get a bit goatee. But so does that stuff in the supermarket, because the stuff in the supermarket's probably a bit older.
Yeah.
And the homogenization process also does play around with the structure of the milk, because it's a bit like cow's milk. You're drinking permeates and water, really.
Okay, so got another question. Can you use a milking machine across cows, sheep, and goat, like the same machine with maybe a different top, or what's the deal there?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yes, you can, but there's a few differences. You have to get a different set of cups, obviously, for the goat, because it's a different size. The other two things you have to keep in mind, that the pressure, the vacuum, is different for goats, and the pulsator rate is different. But you can buy machines that suit both. I think Dairy Maid make one that can suit either or, because you can adjust the pulsator rate and you can adjust the vacuum. You have to do your research on that, but I do know Dairy Maid make one that suits both species. That's quite important. And obviously the cups, you have a different start. Well, obviously there's 2 instead of 4, and they're smaller and they're different size. The goat ones are suitable for sheep as well, so if you're doing sheep as well. But it is and I'm happy to share what those rates should be for goats, because when I first looked into this, it was one of my first questions as well, because I was thinking, if I get a cow and a goat, but I ended up getting 2 different machines simply because my goat dairy is one side of the barn and the cow dairy is the other side. And I wasn't going to drag the machine from one end to the other. But I'm just using the cheap vacuum one with the goats, and I'm using a full bore proper machine for the cow. But yeah, you can use the same machine, but look into it. Just keep in mind that different cups, different pulsation rate, and different vacuum for them, for the species.
And with goats, do you breed them annually to keep them in milk? What's the go there?
Yeah, so they can go for nearly a year, a bit like a cow, without, after birth, from milking, they'll keep going. My goat that I'm milking now, she kidded in October. So she's been going, for nearly 6 months now, and going strong. So she's fine. The gestation period for goats is 5 months. Cows are 9 months. So, obviously the smaller the animal, the shorter the gestation period. You can breed them once a year. Look, and then this comes into the discussion about whether you are kid sharing or calf sharing with your animals.
Yeah.
My dairy goat came from a dairy where they pull the kids off of them when they're born. Okay. My personal preference is not to do that. That's a personal preference. If you leave them on, it means that you don't have to milk them twice a day. I milk my goat twice a day. She doesn't have a kid on her, so I milk her twice a day. Okay. Now, if I had a kid on her, I'd probably just have to milk her once a day. But it depends how much milk you want as well, of course. So I get 3 litres a day from her. Probably far too much goat's milk for a single household, depending on if you are only having goat or whether you've got goat and cow, if you're drinking goat's milk or, having it on your cereal and everything, or you're just making cheese once or twice a week. So my preference in the future when she goes back in kid will be that I will leave the kid or kids, because they quite often have twins, on them, although her first one, she had a single birth. So that I don't have to milk twice a day. My cow has a calf on it and I milk it once a day.
Okay.
Right. That's called kid sharing or calf sharing. It depends on the volumes. If you're just a homesteader, you probably don't want to milk twice a day. And you probably, yes, you could sell off your excess, but you don't want that much. So 3 litres a day really is far too much for me. And now that I've got her, when I breed her next time, I will leave the kid on. So you don't have to milk them at all with dairy goats. You can just milk them when you want to, when you want milk. Yep. Jersey cows are a different situation because they overproduce. That's a whole different conversation.
Whole nother interview. Yeah. Great. Yep. Wow. We've covered so much here. Everybody's saying thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge. They're really enjoying it. Bush Edge is saying she's definitely going to go back and listen through again because you've explained everything so well. Yeah. Is there anything that I should have asked but didn't? Is there anything I've kind of missed there before we wrap up?
All right, I'm just going to check on my notes because I wrote down a whole bunch of notes of things. Don't forget to tell them this, don't forget to tell them that. But, I'm available on Messenger if anyone has any questions about it. And I can just tell you, my personal experience, I guess, really. I don't run a commercial dairy. They might do things different. They probably do things different. I don't need to produce that much milk. So I'm more about having that kind of symbiotic relationship with the goat, just taking what I need, which is why I don't like the idea of taking kids or calves off the animals. For me, ethically, I don't like that. It's a personal preference, though, for everyone. But I have to tell you, if you do, then you are committed to milking every day, if you choose to pull them off of them at birth. Because, otherwise you've got mastitis issues. There's milk fever. There's all sorts of other things that could happen if you don't keep it up. It is a lot easier to keep them. Goats don't have a lot of diseases, really. As I said, probably keep an eye out for respiratory diseases in the winter. As I said, they're not a cold weather animal. As much as you have visions of them on the snowy mountains, in Northern Europe, they don't like the cold weather and, don't do so well in it. Not that we have particularly cold weather. Also, if you've got cement floors in your shelters, put hay, sort of whatever down, something that they won't eat, by the way, just to keep them warm. I think that's about it. I think we covered all of my other notes that I had. Hoof trimming, I think we've pretty much covered it all. So that's
fantastic.
Yeah.
5 Acre Farmer says Thank you for another brilliant interview, Sharon. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and for the offer to private message you. It's so appreciated. And Bushhead says, what incredible knowledge. Thank you for sharing. Now, Robin did drop a question about whether or not there's legislation in WA that you know of around the sale of unpasteurized goat's milk.
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about that because it's pretty much, I think it's Australia-wide, but you cannot sell raw cow's milk or cheese made from raw cow's milk in Australia, the whole of Australia. In Western Australia, you can sell raw goat milk and you can sell raw goat cheese.
Okay.
Now, if you need any information, have a look up on the Ag Department website. Actually, I'll send you the link, Amanda. There's a page all about the Ag Department's rules about goats, if you know what I mean. But actually, it's quite a useful link because they actually tell you how to look after them as well. They're quite, informative, their little pages. So, yes, you can actually sell. Now, if you have young children, pregnant women or very old people in the house and you have any concerns about raw milk, you can just pasteurize it yourself, okay? Homogenization is what destroys the milk, whether it's cow's or goat's milk. But pasteurization, if you heat your milk to 65 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes, keep it at that temperature for 30 minutes, you have pasteurized your milk. Okay? And you can do that at home. And if you have any concerns about, should I have raw goat's milk or raw cow's milk or whatever, works for both.
Wonderful. Awesome. That was a great last little nugget there. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We really appreciate your time. If you send me that link, I'll put it in the comments of this video once it's uploaded, or once it's after we've finished here. And remember, you can find Sharon on her Facebook page at Blessed Life. I'll put a link to that too. Although I think you said you probably need to keep on top of that a bit more, but that's one way to keep track of Sharon and her goats and her cows.
Yeah, I try to remember to put things up there as well. I just use my personal name. I've got an Instagram page which is under my name. Look, feel free to follow it. All I do is put food and the farm stuff on there. There's no real.
That's what we like here. And of course, Sharon is in the group. Don't hesitate to kind of hit her up or ask a question. She's just open to that. So wonderful. All right. So we're going to wrap up here. I'm going to close down this live. You just hang on the call with me, Sharon. And we want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon/evening. And I hope you found that as fascinating as I did. So see you later, everybody. Have a good night.
See you, everyone. Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, folks. You can find Corey and myself at Rockpile Off-grid Homestead on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And remember to head over and join the Australian Homesteaders community, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye for now.